Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about what your dial-up or holdover needs to be if you're shooting your AR-10 at 1,000 yards. Okay, so I'm gonna include some practical data from actually having shot it at 1,000 yards, and then we're gonna also compare it to some of the things that I've theoretically been able to figure out on a ballistic calculator, and we're going to see how they correlate, how close they are. So as far as the dial-up, I'm using a mil scope, right? That's mils. And when you think of mils, think of it's basically it's an angular measurement similar to degrees, all right? So like when you say something that's like, let's say 5 degrees or 1 degree or 90 degrees, right? So mils are similar to that, right? Like you pull out your protractor and you guys understand what 45 degrees is, you guys understand what 90 degrees is. Well, mils is simply another type of angular measurement. Now the reason why we use mils is because it is a much finer measurement, okay? So 1 mil equals to 0.056 degrees, okay? Put another way, 17.8 mils, let's just say 18 mils, right? 18 mils is equal to 1 degree, okay? Rounding it off. 18 mils is 1 degree. So you can see why, like, trying to use degrees, which we're kind of used to, right? It doesn't make sense for dialing up because we'd be working with like decimals, right? So makes a lot more sense to work in mils. Now, an alternative is minutes of angle. That's also somewhat popular. The reason why I recommend mils is because that's basically what the military uses, and the people that are training us, right, that I'm getting my training from, they use mils, so it makes sense to use the same measurements that they're using. Okay, so that's why I use mils, and you're gonna have when you're buying scopes, you're gonna have a lot more options out there when you're buying scopes that are mils versus minutes of angle. Okay, and a lot of people, like, initially they want to use minutes of angle because they think, okay, 1 minute of angle is 1 inch at 100 yards. So they think, okay, at 500 yards, it's going to be 5 inches. But when you get out to like 1,000 yards, it doesn't hold true because it's actually not perfectly. 1 minute of angle is not perfectly 1 inch at 100 yards. It's some. So when you downrange, right? If that's what you're going into this, right? It's not going to work out perfectly, right? It's close enough at 100 yards. It's close enough at 200 and 300 yards, but at 1,000 yards, that's not going to work out perfectly. Okay, so like I said, I use mils because that's what most military snipers use. They're the guys that are basically training us, bringing back this information to us. So that's why I'm at mils. Okay, so. Now we understand what mils is. It's an angular measurement. So my practical experience, right? My practical experience is with 147 grain Freedom munitions, which I've run through a chronograph, has a speed of 2782. Okay, and when I shot it at 1,000 yards, the dial-up, right, to get on target was 11.5 mils. Okay, and the way I got the 11.5 mils was, basically I started at like 850 yards, put some shots. I used the mil grids to self-spot, make corrections. I did that at 900 yards. Then I went to the 1,000 yards, same thing. I made a correction and, dialed in at 11.5, right? And then I saw it was impacting about 2 mils to the right. That was my wind correction. So on the day that I was shooting, I think I had somewhere between a 3 and 5 mile per hour wind. I think it was closer to 3 miles per hour, and it was inconsistent. It's like there was no wind where I was shooting, but it was like downrange. So I ended up with very light wind. I ended up making a 2 mil correction for wind. Now at 1,000 yards, 1 mil is 3 feet. Okay, so 2 mils, right? 2 mils is 6 feet. So with a very light wind, right, like somewhere like about 3 miles per hour, that wasn't even consistent throughout the whole 1,000 yards, I ended up making a 6-foot correction at 1,000 yards, okay? Which is not a big deal really, because I'm just looking at it through the scope. I'm seeing where you have a mill grid. I'm seeing where the bullets impact, and that's my correction. It's not that big of a deal, okay? If you've got the right scope, and I highly recommend the Athena BPR reticle from Primary Arms. It's simple. It has like half mil holes, right? So you don't need holes that are finer than a half mil, but it's on every half mil line, right? So that's the one I recommend that you guys use, the Athena BPR, and it's like a $500 scope. I got the SLX version. It works fine. Okay, so let's go back to working with this data over here. I was able to figure out, practically speaking, at 1,000 yards, my holdover was 11.5 mils. Okay, so I ran through the chronograph. I knew that these 147 grain feet of munitions had a velocity of 2782. Okay, so that's great. That's the next thing I need. Okay, so the next thing I'm now able to do is I downloaded a ballistic calculator on Play Store. Right, I just put it on my phone. So here's the thing: the first time when I tried using the ballistic calculator, I didn't have this data. The data that I had was that at 500 yards, my holdover was something like 2 mils or 2.5 mils, and that's not enough to really get out to 1,000 yards, right? Because basically I was like trying to make it work, and because here's the thing: when you look at the ballistic calculator, one of the numbers that you're gonna have to input, right? It's gonna ask you for velocity. It's gonna ask you for the weight of the bullet, right? And then it's gonna ask you for the bullet coefficient, which is basically how much drag the bullet has. Okay, so that's the variable. Okay, the way I was able to work this out, I used the bullet coefficient as the variable, as the plug number to make this fit. Okay, now I understand that, like, if I can actually go online and look up what the actual bullet coefficient is for the 308, but that's not going to make this work, because there's a lot of other variables that the programmer may have not taken into account. And also remember, these ballistic calculator programs, they're designed for lots of different calibers. Okay, so what I knew is I knew my velocity, I knew my bullet weight, and I knew what my actual elevation was at 1,000 yards, 11.5 mils. So what I did is I played around with the bullet coefficient to figure out what bullet coefficient I needed to put in there to get close to this number that I know is correct. Okay, and that ended up being like a 0.2 or 2.0, I forget, like a 2.0, a 2 bullet coefficient, or 0.2, one of those two numbers. Sorry, I can't remember, but it was either a 2 or 0.2. And this is telling me, basically the ballistic calculator told me that the dial-up was 12 mils, okay, which is really close to the 11.5, okay. So now I figured out how to get this ballistic calculator to work, to give me a number that actually means something, that actually correlates to the 11.5. And the way I'm approaching it, this is basically the way an accountant approaches it, because that's my background. I'm an accountant. Okay, so here's the thing. As accountants, a lot of times we do all these theoretical calculations, but then we look at, okay, what are the actual results? Those are the actual results. You got to make the calculations fit the actual results. Okay, and then once you got a formula that fits the actual results, then you can say, okay, now we can use this formula that fits this example of actual results, and then we can apply it to other things. So that's the approach that I'm taking here. So I got this ballistic calculator to give me a number that makes sense based on what the bullet's actually doing at 1,000 yards. Okay, great, excellent, great. So now I got all this other ammunition, right, that I haven't shot at 1,000 yards. And so, for example, I got 150 grains of Freedom ammunition. Now here's an interesting thing. Even though this is a heavier bullet, it's got a higher velocity, 28 to 32 feet per second. Okay, So just because because normally the general pattern that you're going to have is that the heavier bullets are going to be going slower. That's not always the case, okay? Because sometimes you just have a really hot round out there. So the Freedom Munitions 150 grain is a lot hotter than the 147 grain that they sell. So this one's 28.32. So now that I've already figured out what the plug value is for that bullet coefficient to make this work. I use that plug value, and now this is telling me that my holdover at 1,000 yards should be 11 mils. Okay, so that makes sense. It's a faster bullet. It's going 1 mil slower. Again, now this is going to be affected by temperature, right? Air density, what's happening that day. So that's why, like, you just need a place to start, okay? And then you can self-spot the impacts on the mil grid in your scope, and then you can make corrections there. Half mil up, half mil down, half mil left or right for the wind, okay? So with 150 grain Freedom Munitions at 1,000 yards, using the 50-yard zero, okay, it's a 11 mil dial-up. We already talked about the 147 grain Freedom Munition, right? That has a velocity of 27.82. That's a 12 mil dial-up, okay? Now, 149 grain American Sniper, okay? That has a velocity of 2671 feet per second, okay? So this one's a little bit slower, right? So I got these listed from fastest to slowest. So American Sniper, 2671. That's a 13 mil dial-up, okay? The 175 grain Winchester M118. This is your premium ammunition, or this one is the one that hits like those. I did a video where I got like a 0.5 MOA, a half inch, or actually it was 1 inch at 200 yards, right? So that's like a half MOA round. So the Win M118, velocity 25.33. So this has a 14.5 mil dial-up. Okay. So again, this is, especially with this expensive ammunition, I wanna start off with like being like theoretically as close as possible, and from that point spot the impacts and make my corrections. Okay. So 14.5 mil dial-up for 1,000 yards with the 175 grain Winchester M118. And then I've got the 150 grain Tula, okay, which is the slowest one that I've used. So I got these are all with 20-inch barrels, right? This is my Palmetto AR-10 with the 20-inch barrel. Velocity 2409, right? So this is the slowest one, and this one has a 17 mil dial-up. Okay. Now the reason why this is significant, this Tula 2409, your hunting rounds are typically going to be a little bit slower. Okay. The reason is because over the years, hunters that usually shoot out of these bolt-action rifles, they're more recoil sensitive, right? So over the years, they've asked for softer shooting ammunition. So your typical hunting rounds are probably going to be closer to what this 150 grain Tula is doing. So they're going to have a velocity probably, I don't know for sure, of 2409. That's a 17 mil dial. Okay. So the interesting thing here is, like, if you look at all of these, right, from top to bottom, the difference between each of these is about 100 feet per second. Okay. So because you got from the top going all the way down. So starting at 28, around, let's say about 2,800, and losing 150 feet per second. And losing 100 feet per second all the way down here, right? We started off at 11, and we're pretty much going up by an increment of 1 mil. Okay. So again, now we're seeing kind of like a pattern. Actually, when we got to the Tula, which is like really slow, because we went up 1.5 mil with the Win M118, and then when we got to the Tula, now it's actually a larger increment. Okay, but this kind of gives you some idea of kind of what to expect. Now, I also ran these numbers with the 16-inch barrel, right? Because again, everything I gave you was with a 20-inch barrel. I did have some data off of a 16-inch barrel because I got like an AK Vepr that shoots, it's an AK-47 that shoots 308s. So I did run that through the chronograph. So if you've got a 16-inch barrel this might be useful for you. So with the 147 grain Freedom munitions, okay, basically from going from a 20-inch to a 16-inch, I lost about 100 feet per second. So that gave me 2675. I have it here in purple. So basically I went from 12 mils to 12.5, okay? Then with the American Sniper, when I put that in the 16-inch barrel, this one was a big drop. I went from 2671 down to 2443. So I went from 13 mils to a 16 mil holdover. Okay, all right. So 13. So again, 1 mil at 1,000 yards is 3 feet. So that's like 3 mils here. We got like a 9, almost a 10-foot change here. We're going from a 20-inch barrel to a 16-inch. Now that's interesting. Why is it that, like with the Freedom munitions, we had like a half mil change, and now with the American Sniper, we have a 3 mil change? Why would that happen? Well, a reason for that might be with the burn rate of the gunpowder that's in it. Okay, because some gunpowders are going to burn faster. So what that means is if you have a faster burning gunpowder, and even if you shoot that, let's say in a shorter barrel, if you get a complete burn by in those, let's say 16 inches, well, it's not going to make that much of a difference that your barrel is now 16 inches versus 20 inches. But if you have a that's with a fast burning powder. If you have a fast burning barrel and it gets a complete burn in those 16 inches, it's not going to make a difference that, hey, if I have an extra 4 inches on the barrel, it's not going to make that much of a difference. But if I have a slow burning powder, right, and now I'm shooting that in the 16-inch barrel, well, a lot of the burn is going to happen outside the barrel, so I'm going to lose a lot of velocity, right? And that's not something that you're going to know until you actually run it through the chronograph, and you're like, okay, wow, okay, this ammunition here, let's say if you're running if you test it out in a 20-inch barrel and a 16-inch, you might say, okay, this ammunition, I see a huge drop when I go from 20 inches to 16 inches, right? If you see a huge drop, that's because that has a slow burning powder, okay? That, it needs that longer barrel to get a complete burn or more complete burn. But if you're shooting a type of ammunition where, okay, you go from 20 inches to 16 inches, you don't see like a massive change, well, that's because that's a fast burning powder, okay? So the other one I got here was the Tula. So the Tula, again, this is I went from 20 inches, I went from 2409. In 16 inches, I dropped to 2268. Okay, so like I lost almost 200 feet per second here, and also in the American Sniper, I lost, let's say, almost 200 feet per second. So if you got with the Tula, 16 inches, velocity 2268, my dial-up is 19 mils. Okay, so I went so you can see, like, with this fast at 1,000 yards now, with the fastest one that I have here is the Freedom Munitions 150 grain, right, at 2832. My dial-up is 11 mils, okay, on a 20-inch barrel. But if I'm using, let's say, 150 grains Tula in a 16-inch barrel, okay, my dial-up is now 19 mils. So that's like from 11 to 19, and again, 1 mil is 3 feet. That's a tremendous difference. That's a big difference at 1,000 yards, depending on what ammunition you're using. And not just how heavy your bullet is, right? Because these are both 150 grains, right? This Tula is 150 grains, which is my slowest, and this Freedom Munitions up here is 150 grains. That's my fastest, right? And we got a difference of, if we're staying with the 20-inch barrels, 11 versus 17, and if I go to a 20-inch barrel, I got 19. Okay, so this kind of gives you something to work with. It really helps if you have a chronograph, and you can shoot through the chronograph and see what your velocity is. Now, if you've got a 50-yard zero, right, you at least have some place to start. Okay, because again, these are some big differences, like from 11 mils all the way down to 19 mils down here. Those are some huge differences you have. This will save you some ammunition, right? You'll have a better idea of where to start with this. Okay? So yeah, let me know if you guys got any questions. I wanted to add was it's 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 very possible to run out of elevation on your scope. So the scope that I'm using, this primary arms 5 to 26, has on the top turn I can dial up a total of 30 mils. Okay, so here's the thing. It really helps. First thing is like get a 20 MOA scope mount, because that's going to basically give you 4 additional mils of elevation. Because what happens is, like, normally when you zero in and you're dialing, you're only using like the top half of of the travel on your turret. Okay, you're not using the bottom half. So if you get like a 20 MOA, that now gives you an additional 4 out of the bottom that you can use. Now, with the 20 MOA mount that I have, my total elevation of travel that I have from basically my 50-yard zero is a total of 20 mils. Okay, so if I was, because here's the thing with the Tula, I'm dialing up 17 mils. Okay, so I'm running out of mils, and if I would have put this scope on a 16-inch AR-10, right? And I gotta dial up 19 mils. I'm really close to my max of 20 mils, and that's at 1,000 yards. Well, what if I want to go to 1,200 yards? Right? I'm going to run out of travel. Okay, so if at all possible, I get yourself instead of getting a 20 MOA mount, get a 25, or better yet, a 30. I've already figured out that for this scope that I have, which has 30 mils of travel, if I could get a 30 MOA mount, and my zero would be, the point that I would zero would be, I would still have an additional like 3 mils of downward travel. So I would still have a comfortable margin to get like a 50-yard zero, and then I would have a lot of upward travels. Now the issue is that the 20 MOA mounts, there's lots of them out there. You can get them cheap. Like the one that I have on this scope is from Discovery Opt. It was, I think, $35. Okay, to get either a 25 MOA mount or a 30 MOA mount, you're looking at like $200. Okay, so the where it is right now, right in March of 2024, getting a 25 or 30 MOA mount that would be useful is expensive. Right, we're getting into like $200 territory there. So to me, it makes sense, right? If you're going to get the 20 MOA, right, don't bother getting the $100 one. Okay, get the $35 one from Discovery Opt. It holds zero, works fine. Okay, it's light enough. And the goal is that down the road, right, ideally when a 30 MOA mount comes along, that's through competition, you're able to get those for about whatever, $50. You're going to want that one. You're going to want a 30 MOA mount. The 20 MOA mounts for shooting 1,000 yards and plus, trying to get out towards like 1,500 yards, is not going to cut it, right? The 20 MOA mounts. So I'm telling you guys, don't invest too much money in the 20 MOA mounts, which you're going to need, to comfortably get out to 1,000 yards with different length barrels and different types of ammunitions. Get the 20, but don't overinvest in it, because 20 sucks. Okay, you need 25 or 30. Okay, so that's the thing I wanted to add, which is kind of important. Like, I really wish I could get a 30 MOA mount. Now the other thing that's important is when you buy the scope, make sure your turret has lots of travel, right? Because my scope, the primary arms 5 to 25 by 56, even though it's like an SLX scope, it's like one of the $500 budget one, right? It still has 30 mils of travel. If you get another scope that has less than that, again, you're gonna as you start going out to further distances with certain types of, let's say, slower ammunition, you're gonna run out of travel on your turrets. Okay, one of the questions that you might have is, why dial up? Why not just use the reticle? Well, as you zoom in, the reticle is going to come out of your field of view. So when I'm looking when I'm zoomed up to 25 mil, or when I'm zoomed up to 25 magnification at 1,000 yards, and I look at my reticle, I think the lowest I can only see like 6 mils down on the reticle. Okay, so because it basically, you zoom in, the rest of the reticle kind of falls out of your field of view, and it's also really uncomfortable to look like at the very bottom of your reticle. And plus, you got to be able to spot the impact. So ideally, you want to be able to dial up so that the impacts are happening in the center of your scope, and then you can see the impacts below on your mil grid, and you can make adjustments and record it and work from there. Okay, so a couple of things for you guys to think about. I'm going to give you guys a close-up to this data. Okay, so everything here is in 20 inches, right? That's in blue. And I did include some data in here in purple for a 16-inch barrel. Okay, so this is a good starting point for you guys to start working with, again, to get out to 1,000 yards. And the great thing is, once you get out to 1,000 yards, everything inside is pretty easy, because once you get your ballistic calculator to be accurate at 1,000 yards, it's going to be accurate, let's say, at 700 yards and 500 yards and anything under that.